as we move forward, because some of the heavyweights in the big cap space are slightly down. But the sentiment right now is entirely positive, and that's largely because of the fact that a long-awaited bill, the GST, the Goods and Services Tax, has finally been tabled, and that means there's a breakthrough, and from early 2016 we should see the rollout happening. Satya Podrar and Rajiv Dimri, as promised, join me on the show. Let me start off with you, Mr. Podrar. I'm going to actually start it very simple for our viewers, because they've all heard about GST, but I don't think anyone really knows what the difference is between the current regime and what GST is going to do. Could you just explain it to us simply in as short a time as possible?
Well, the difference is very little, in fact. The only difference is that the base for the taxes that are levied today will be broader than what it is today. Today we have three taxes: the state VAT, the central service tax, and the central excise duties. All of those three taxes are partial taxes. The state VAT only applies to goods, the central service tax only applies to services, and the central excise duties apply to only goods at the manufacturing level. Idea is to combine all these three taxes into one single tax called the GST. So these three taxes will be consolidated into GST. GST will apply on all sales in the same manner as the VAT does, but on a broader basis. So it's really as simple as that.
But does it mean that all taxes across the board, across any state, becomes the same?
No, there'll be two components to the GST: the central component, which is called the CGST, and the state component, which is called the SGST. SGST will be collected, both will be collected by a common platform, but the SGST portion will be handed over to the states, and the CGST portion will be handed over to the central government.
No, what I'm trying to ask is that if I'm manufacturing in Uttar Pradesh and I largely sell in Uttar Pradesh, will I face exactly the same GST in Maharashtra, or will it be slightly higher or lower?
No, that all depends upon the tax rates chosen by the states. Okay. The central tax will be the same in all over India, but the state tax rates, if they are uniform, then the state tax could also be the same regardless of whether you sell in Assam, Uttarakhand or Maharashtra. But there's a possibility that the state tax rates could vary within a narrow band of 1 to 2 percentage points.
Okay, let me get Mr. Dimri in. Then what is so revolutionary about it, Mr. Dimri? In the break you were telling me that forget about the fact that fuel's not in it. This is a real positive and we should look forward with. What I'm hearing from Mr. Podrar doesn't make me think that it's that revolutionary.
Well, I agree with Mr. Podrar in terms of the base, because government is still getting taxes on base, although through different means. But if I look at it from a manufacturer's point of view, the number of taxes that one has to deal with, and each tax comes with its interface with the authorities, with the regulators, trying to pass it on. Excise duty is not available as a credit through the chain, particularly when we're dealing with FMCG goods. All that will change. So the way I distribute goods, the way I procure goods, the way I think about where to locate a manufacturing entity, should I be in a tax-free zone, should I not be in a tax-free zone, all those decisions will have to undergo a change. And the entire credit mechanism, the taxes I pay in state A, availability of that credit in state B is a big change, and that will impact the way we do business.
Okay, that's the thing that you need to explain to our viewers.
Right.
And when I say I have viewers, I mean me as well. Mr. Dimri, when you say that under the new system, you're saying that if I have tax credit in one state, I can actually get that in Maharashtra as well? If I'm in UP, I can get it in Maharashtra?
So today we have what is called an origin-based tax that if I manufacture in Maharashtra, I first pay excise duty, and that pretty much is gone. And unless it's a B2B transaction where somebody else is using those goods to manufacture in turn, that credit chain stops.
Okay.
In a GST environment, we will have no difference between an excise duty and tax on sales. Everything will be a common tax and is available as credit, whether to a retailer or to a manufacturer. So that's a big change in terms of the effect that taxes have through the supply chain. Secondly, today it's a matter of, in a sense, a tax impact, whether I sell into a state or I maintain a branch and I stock transfer the goods and then I sell. So it also impacts the way I would distribute and sell. So a lot of companies manufacture in one state and distribute through branches in multiple states. Partly it is to do with the efficiency of supply chain and logistics, but partly that behavior is driven by taxes. Because if I were to sell from state A to state B and pay CST, that CST is lost and it becomes a cost of the transaction. So the manner of distribution...
So how does that change under this SGST?
Because the taxes that we will be paying originating from state A going into state B, that tax will not go to the origin state, that tax will go to the destination state. And therefore the way the taxes will work and the states will collect taxes and get compensated, that will have a big impact. And therefore today the whole issue has been the states try to localized manufacturing in their state because on origin basis they make money on that. And therefore the CST, which is the central sales tax, which is an origin based tax, when that moves away eventually, although there's a 2-year time frame for that, when it eventually moves away, the states with a larger consumption will make more taxes rather than the states where there is origin of goods.
But
So,
that's Mr. Poddar, let me get you in on that. You know, that's a bit of a problem if you're trying to kind of use this to increase, what should I say, development in the underdeveloped areas, because by almost definition, states which are more developed have a better domestic, have a better demand environment. So they're likely to consume more. Now you're saying that I can't really work by giving tax incentive to someone to create production in my state because that gives me some kind of gain. But those who are consuming are in any case going to get the tax.
No, I think, first of all, let's not mix the issue of incentives versus who will get the revenue. Under the consumption taxes, including the current taxes, the central excise service tax and the VAT, revenue is collected by the states where the consumption is taking place. Of course, in the case of the central taxes, revenue is collected regardless of which state consumes the goods and services. Now, there is one more tax, which is the central sales tax. Central sales tax goes to the producing provinces, not the consuming provinces. And it is that central sales tax which is the culprit, which balkanizes the Indian common market. It causes shifts in the location of production, depending upon the incentives given. The proposal, and the key proposal of the GST is that the central sales tax will be abolished. It will be completely subsumed under the GST. Now, when you subsume the central sales tax, you have a lot of benefits because then the manufacturing will be located according to the market forces, and they may well locate manufacturing in the same states as today, or they may well locate it to where the consumption is taking place. But the key point is that tax will not be a consideration in deciding where the manufacturing should be located. When it comes to incentives, incentives today are to locate the manufacturing activities where the consumption is taking place, but in practical situations that incentive is very limited because ultimately manufacturing has to be located where the factors of production are available, where the raw material is available, where the infrastructure of electricity, power and road transportation is available. So all that will happen is that the tax will not be a distorting factor in the location of manufacturing, and it will be based on the market efficiency considerations.
Mr. Dimri, right now, for instance, when one looks at the kind of tax incentives given by some of those states, like let's say Uttarakhand had given tax incentives, we saw a lot of manufacturing hubs actually come up around there. How will that continue, or will that continue at all?
Well, the incentives in Uttarakhand that you're referring to were the incentives under the excise law.
Mr. Poddar, I'll come to you in just a minute. I just want to get Mr. Dimri in and then I'll come back to you.
The incentives that you're referring to in Uttarakhand are the incentives under the state, under their central excise law, and that was the excise exemption. Most states in India also provide some kind of incentives for VAT. So there are different kinds of incentives available through the country. Incentives that are in the form of exemption become incompatible in a GST environment because it is a multi-point tax with input credits flowing through the chain, and therefore exemptions are incompatible. They will have to be converted into some form of deferral or refund mechanism, and therefore they will continue to live out their balanced life. The state incentives have largely turned into a refund mechanism, and exemptions are no longer prevalent, and they can continue for a bit, but the new policies that will come out post GST will have to be somewhat different than the ones that are available today, because even the government revenue, the respective state government revenue, will behave differently, and therefore these schemes will have to work through in a different mechanism.
Mr. Poddar, you wanted to come in on that.
Yes, there are two comments I want to make. Number one is that the idea of the GST is to get away from distortions in the market created by incentives or by the application of tax. Both should be removed from the tax system so that Indian common market is not balkanized into different pockets within the country. Number two is, as Rajiv mentioned, the incentives which are currently being offered, the probability is very high that those incentives will be discontinued. Now, they may take birth in another form, which could be like easier access to land, cheaper power, or whatever else the states want to provide to attract industries to their locations. But the GST itself will not be an instrument available to divert manufacturing from one area to another. Other point I want to make is that when incentives are provided, like in Uttarakhand from the excise duties, it's really a beggar thy neighbor policy. Punjab has been crying because even though industries are locating in Uttarakhand, they are locating out of Punjab. So from the national point of view, it's not really much of a benefit. But in fact, it can be leading to more inefficient production and output in the country.
So would it be fair to say that GST is like a WTO or a GATT or for domestic national economy?
Not quite to the same extent, but yes, that's the intent, that the goods and factors of production must move freely from one part of the country to another part of the country without checkposts, without border controls, without any incentives.
So essentially, octroi, state sales tax, excise, everything is subsumed under a single tax, which is two parts, as you mentioned, but a single point of payment.
Yes.
Mr. Dimri, how does it affect an individual company directly? If I'm a company, I'm producing something, how do I pay the tax? What's the difference? How do I calculate it?
Well, some of those mechanics are yet to come out because we haven't seen any draft laws or legislation, but applying the overall policy, I could say that generally for a manufacturer, GST would bring relief in two things. A, the number of touch points vis-a-vis the tax authorities will reduce, because today I have to deal with multiple tax agencies individually, and that will come down, and therefore the compliance burden and the points of disconnect between the authorities and the companies will come down. So generally for manufacturing companies, the pool of credit should ideally go up, the cascade of taxes should come down, and the touch points with tax authorities will come down. It's a different story for service companies, where today large companies with national presence only have to deal with one agency called service tax, and now they will have to deal with each state in which they operate. So while there is a great advantage for manufacturing companies, for service companies, whether I'm a bank, an insurance company, advertising company, whatever, transport, any form of service-based companies, my touch points at the state level will increase, and I now have to start dealing with state agencies. So those are some of the changes that will take place in this environment. It will apply differently to a different group of companies or a sector. So you talked about manufacturing company. By and large, manufacturing companies should see ease of doing business on account of taxes and better common market in India, as Mr. Poddar also mentioned.
But for services, you're saying that it actually becomes tougher?
It becomes tougher, yes.
So for
the compliance environment.
So for the largest part of the economy, actually it becomes tougher. That's interesting.
Well, tougher in the sense of the compliance point. So today, if imagine any service company, let's take a large bank which has got branches in every major ABC towns. Its service tax environment can actually be handled at a single point. Like an income tax, service tax can be handled at a single point. Service sector is not exposed to state-based compliances. In a GST, that will happen. Now, part of the idea of GST also is to unburden the manufacturing sector and let service sector, which is a large component, or largest component of the GDP, also contribute its fair share. So it's not happening by accident. It is part of the design that the service sector and the manufacturing sector should start contributing equally to the government exchequer. But the downside is service sector getting exposed to state-based compliance will be a new dimension for service sector which they have not been exposed to so far.
Mr. Poddar, the argument for GST to a large extent has been that it has a major GDP multiplier. Now, if the GDP multiplier is positive for manufacturing and largely negative for the services sector, then in the immediate future we should expect GDP negative multiplier rather than a positive one, right?
Well, I think let me go back a little bit. The benefits of the GST are dependent upon the design of the GST. The government has only dropped one shoe, the second shoe is yet to fall. What they've done is they've proposed a constitutional framework for enabling the levy of the GST, but lots of design features of the GST are yet to be revealed, and they will only come when the model draft legislation for the GST is being drafted. Now, the most critical component of the GST design is whether it applies to the comprehensive base across all goods and services, or whether it is applied to a narrow base. And the second important component is the tax rates at which the goods and services are made taxable. Now, on the former, the base, Empowered Committee in its discussion has taken a very narrow view of the base. They've been reluctant to broaden the base to many of the items which are exempt from tax today, or even services. The list of services which will become taxable is not really much longer than what it is today under the central service tax. So the base that has been decided to date is a very narrow base. It does not even apply the tax to half of the total consumption basket. As a result, the tax rates they have calculated are draconian. The Empowered Committee has stated that the standard revenue neutral rate they have worked out could be in the range of 27%. At 27%, it will be a stillborn baby, because it will not simplify compliance, because if the tax applies to some goods, some services, or other goods and services, compliance burden will multiply. Number two is that if the tax rate is at 27%, now think of the service sector that Rajiv Dimri was talking about. Currently, the services pay the tax of 12%. Now, 12% will escalate to 27%. That will be the death of the service sector in India. Service sector has been the engine of growth in India, and if the tax rate is applied to 27%, it will lead to massive evasion of the service tax, or the industries will disappear from the organized sector. So all of that really depends upon how the GST is designed. I'm not saying that the GST that will be revealed or unveiled will be of the type with a 27% tax rate, but at the moment, this is where the discussion are.
In fact, I think the lowest rate that anyone has calculated is close to 24%. Even that is very high. I mean, the lowest rate is 24%.
No, not anyone. The lowest possible tax rate, I've done my own calculations. 13th Finance Commission done the calculations. If you apply the tax to the comprehensive base at a single rate, the lowest rate is well below, not well below, but close to 12%. In fact, it's 11.3%. This is combined central and state tax rate.
But that requires a wider base,
which will lead to the GDP multiplier.
Are you saying that requires a wider base?
Wider base.
So you're saying that the narrow base is the real problem. It's a narrow base which is causing this 27 to 24, 24 to 27, because we've seen that 27%, and we've looked at some reports that the government is also discussing 24% with the states. to make it revenue neutral. Mr. Dimri, for states, and I'm going to come specifically to the...
in fact...
Sorry, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Poddar.
No, it's not lower than 27 to 24. I have seen discussions where the rate can go even higher than 27%.
Oh dear. Okay, so essentially if you're a manufacturer, then you pay 27% consolidated amount, and then on top of that, of course, you pay corporate taxes if you're left with any profits. That's a separate issue altogether. Now, Mr. Dimri, when I look at that kind of a narrow base, 27%, I mean, no one wants to pay that GST then.
I fully agree with what Mr. Poddar said, and that's been the big debate that's been ongoing for many years. Let's break it into two parts. I think the point that Mr. Poddar made, that if service sector has to go up from 12 to 27, it is just unthinkable for any economy and any sector to absorb that kind of tax rate. On the other hand, if we take an overall view of large manufacturing sector, with 12% excise duty and roughly anywhere between 12.5 to 14.5 VAT rate across India, the manufacturing sector is anyway paying approximately 25 to 27% taxes. The idea is to bring that down and not take services from 12 to 27. I mean, yes, we need to balance out the two two wheels of what are moving the economy, and therefore manufacturing sector should see a drop in the GST rate, effective tax rate. Service sector will have to, come up a little bit. The question is, if we think of a 27%, we are talking about by far the most expensive economy in the world. I mean, global average is around 19%. To then think of somewhere where we will have 27%, rather than more companies coming into the mainstream economy, we might see more companies going into the parallel economy, and that would be counterproductive. Part of the reason or part of the advantage of GST is that more and more people try and come into the tax net rather than stay out because of the input credit mechanism. So yes, a lot of design issues have to come out, a lot of details have to come out. What we've seen are the enabling provisions to deal with the constitutional framework to allow for GST introduction. Beyond that, we have very little details to be able to make some very specific observation about how will it work. But the larger point that I made on service sector, if we have a dual level GST, which is more or less done deal, states will get a right to tax services, and nationwide service companies will have to deal with state taxes, state level as well. That's a new dimension for service companies and will add to their compliance challenge. Now, if the GST design takes into account that aspect and deals with the way of smoothing out that issue, maybe the impact will be not so bad. So some of these things we will watch as the details emerge.
So two things to resolve. One is make it smoother for service companies, and then just get the tax rate fine, right? 27%. It looks to me 27% is what Mr. Poddar is saying is the standing committee has recommended. Of course, the agreement is that keep fuel taxes out. It looks to me that this great breakthrough at the end of the day is emerging to be something which only benefits states in terms of their revenues rather than the manufacturers and services. Mr. Poddar.
Well, you're absolutely right. My ultimate test of GST being a benefit to the economy or not is the tax rate at which it is applied and the base to which it is applied. If the GST rate can be kept within the range of 12%, then by implication the base will be very broad. If the base is very broad, compliance will be very simple, and compliance will also be very significantly positive. Means people will be willing to pay and love to pay this tax as opposed to current plethora of multiple taxes. So I think put all the technicalities behind and really focus on the tax rate, because that's the ultimate test of a good tax system. When Japan introduced the GST, they brought it in at 3%. Singapore brought in the GST at the same 3%. Australia brought in the GST at 10%. New Zealand brought in the GST at 12%. Even South Africa brought in the GST in the range of 12 to 14%. Now, if the tax rate is brought in at those levels, it provides a significant boost to the economy, simplifies compliance, and improves the overall efficiency of the tax system. And at the moment, it is possible to go to that model. It is economically feasible. And all that is lacking is the political will between most likely from the states. If the states are not cooperating, if the states are not prepared to play the tango, then we will have a worse mess than what we have today.
All right.
So let's keep our hopes alive, and let's do hope that the political process converts to a better model of GST. But to make any predictions on the basis of what has gone on in the past 7 years, one cannot be sanguine and be fully confident that we'll get that model.
Mr. Dimri, one final word from you. You know, it seems suddenly that entire breakthrough that we're talking about, that the political breakthrough, there's a lot of work still to be done.
Well, I don't think this should take away the fact that it is a breakthrough, because what we have as a breakthrough is at a political level, and that I think should be recognized for.
No, but what Mr. Poddar is trying to say is that perhaps the breakthrough is at the political level is based on the fact that you're going to get 27% tax. Every state would, instead of manufacturers and services wanting to pay that tax, as you were mentioning, right now it's states who want that tax more than anything else. And
that's the part of the debate that is going on at the IMPART committee level, the Ministry of Finance, and so the breakthrough needs to be recognized for what it is. That's a political decision for the parties to come together and reform taxes. The manner and the design of reform comes down at a level lower than the level at which the current breakthrough has happened. So I think the issues that are there are issues under debate for last 5-7 years, and these are extremely important issues. In the interest of being overcautious, the state cannot come up and draw the line so high that it has no chance of being successful. And therefore, if the states are going to come in and take a hardest position, say, I want 30%, because I don't want my revenue to be protected, that's a non-starter. On the other hand, for me to imagine that India overnight will become from highest tax country to a lowest tax country is also a bit of a major expectation. And maybe the answer lies somewhere. So if we are right now talking about a range possibly from 12% to 27%, 27% exceptionally high, 12%... So
20%, would you be happy with 20%?
Well, if the global average is 19, and if my information is correct, and maybe Mr. Poddar can confirm that, I look at it that most manufacturing sector today are in the region of 25. I'm talking about manufacturing sector. That has to come down. And 12% services will have to move up a little. Yes, so 19 to 22%. Maybe a place to start. I know Mr. Poddar would not like to hear that number, but maybe we can have his thoughts as well on this.
Mr. Poddar.
I think if I can say so, India is not a high-taxed economy. Currently, the excise duties and the state taxes combined amount to no more than 5% of GDP. Now, if you have a broad tax base, you don't need a 27% tax rate.
You're saying it's not a high-tax economy, it's a high-tax rate economy.
High-tax rate, absolutely right.
All right. Thanks so much for joining me, Mr. Poddar, Mr. Dimri. Pleasure having you. You know, the points raised by you, several corporates are also raising. They're saying that it's a positive thing, but the rate seems to be a little too high. Let's start off with what Naina Lal Kidwai had to say.
I think the issue in GST, however, from the industry point of view, while everything is positive, the issue is really to see what would be a realistic rate. And what I'm reading, while the rate has not been declared, the rate that the government is talking about, or I read in the papers, I should say more accurately, is somewhere in the mid-20s. Now, to me, that sounds like a much higher rate. It ought to be below 20. And I think when we first started talking about it, we were looking at rates somewhere in the vicinity of about 16%. So, but I'm sure that that will get sorted out. And the rollout of 2016 that has been promised, I hope that happens.
It's clearly not a perfect GST. Leaving out things, petroleum, tobacco, liquor, is not ideal. And the rate at which the GST comes in may still be higher than we would have wanted.
But petroleum is not out of GST.
No, it's not out, but let's say it's been included, but with no action for three years. But I think if you have to give it to the government that compromise had to happen, and these are some of the compromises which were critical. And to be fair, the finance minister had in FICCI only 3 months ago said, we will get GST through. It may not be a great GST, it will be a good GST. And I believe we can live with that. So a fantastic move that it's happened. I don't think it's a scurry to make it happen. They've been working very hard. A scurry to get it through the winter session of Parliament, yes, because that's drawing to a close. And very critical that we see this through, because we need the April 2016 to be in place, the GST to be in place. And for it to be in place, there's a lot around the IT backbone that needs to happen as well. So we need to directionally move to put all of this into place. So I think a very, very important one there.
A lot of time still, a lot of work to be done. Siddharth Sanyal is coming up next. That's after a break. Chief India economist at Barclays Capital. One of the voices everyone wants to hear. Unique, very, very knowledgeable Siddharth Sanyal. That's right after this very short break. Stay with us.